Hey folks, welcome to Inside EPL, the first review of the season. Thank God we're past the filling dead space with content phase. Rowan, how's things, mate?
Very well. It's good to kick the season off. Fantasy Premier League is in full swing. It feels like life is back to normal. So I think football fans can rejoice. A pretty interesting first week as well. What about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting first week. All right. Yeah, there's been some. We said this a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about transfers that teams will have injuries in the first week. Things will change. All of a sudden, the transfer market and who's interested in who would change rapidly just
Big
before
time.
deadline. And then you have to look at the weekend, not just the results, but also the injuries for certain players as well, which will no doubt change the transfer strategy of a couple of teams in there, especially some of the bigger ones as well. Yeah. So, yeah. Any standouts from the weekend for you before we get into the detail?
Well, I think the Newcastle Villa game was to me was the game I was actually looking forward to that game more than Chelsea Liverpool, because it's funny because I mean Chelsea Liverpool such a typically Titanic game, even though funny little stat, the last 8 times they've played has been a draw, and either 0-0 or 1-0, so usually quite low scoring tight affairs, and that was kind of the return of the fallen giants game, and the Newcastle Villa was like the emergence of the new boys on the block game, and there was a lot of hype around both teams coming into that, and very emphatic result in that game. So that was my favorite game, and it did not disappoint.
For a complete game spectacle, it was a cracking game, because at no point, even at 0-0, was there any. It wasn't 0-0 for long, but even at that stage, it was very obvious both teams were going for this game and were going to be attacking, and that just continued for the full 90 minutes, which I think Aston Villa want to probably maybe look at shutting the back door a little bit, especially towards the end of the game when they were really chasing it. They were leaving huge amounts of space for Newcastle to get in around the back of them, and that's the angled runs in around the back of the fullbacks as well. There was tons of space, but baptism of fire for Pau Torres, who came in after Tyrone Mings got injured. But
welcome to the Premier League, Pau.
Yeah, and then Sandro Tonali,
big result.
Yeah, Tonali.
Well, the two new boys, Tonali scoring on his debut, and then Moussa Diaby was the new boys really earned their corn.
Harvey Barnes as well, who just I said this a couple of weeks ago, he's just going to get you goals off the bench. That's what he does. What he's done for Leicester, he has goals. When teams are getting tired, he's a weapon to use because he's savage pace.
13 goals.
He's a really great finisher, off the mark already. First game of the season, so
13
great for
goals
him
last season. Yeah.
Any surprise? Anything?
I mean, does he get a start? I mean, anything that stood out from what?
Any kind of shocks that surprised you, or any results that surprised you?
The United result surprised me, both because I thought it was going to be a lot bigger before the game, and I didn't think we deserved it after the game. So 1-0 was very surprising for me, both pre kickoff whistle and post kind of end of whistle. I thought the 1-0 to United was absolutely crazy. The Newcastle 5-1 was obviously a mental score I didn't expect, but United's 1-0 was unexpected for a variety of reasons. So I think that was a pretty interesting result at the final whistle, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll get into that as well, because it's obviously a pretty contentious moment in that game as well, which has been talked about by the PGMOL as well as Sky Sports have gone in on that. So we'll get to that, because there is a legacy point that we made a couple of weeks ago as well that's worth getting back into on that as well. So we'll come to that later on.
Great.
Before we get to the results, a couple of just updates on transfers and just personal thoughts on this as well, Rowan. Jack Harrison's joined Everton from Leeds on a season-long loan, which is apparently the last of the 11 season-long loans that will leave Leeds as part of the relegation release clauses, which is an absolute disaster. But Harrison is joining Everton. There's a possibility of an option to buy there for him as well. He's injured. He'll be out for another couple of weeks, but we used to call him pillow foot, because when the ball just comes out of the air, it just sticks to his foot. Given that Sean Dyche likes to play very direct, long football, having somebody like Jack Harrison who can take the ball out of the air as easy as can would probably be an asset to them. Does go missing in the middle of a season, but tends to start very well and finish very well. He'll get a lot of goals and assists, and Everton need them.
Everton, they need some signings. So I mean, what are your thoughts on Jack Harrison? Is it a good move for him? Is he someone that deserves this move? Is he someone that you guys are going to miss in the championship? I mean, what do you think his impact is going to be for Everton once obviously he's back from injury?
Yeah, from a Leeds fan perspective, it's kind of been a split camp. A lot of people aren't happy, including myself, and even the goodbye message. We got less than 3 lines of a goodbye from him after 5 years, and pretty much plucking him from obscurity because he was on Man City's books. Then he went to New York. He was in
There was
America.
a lot of
Then he
noise
went
about
to,
him in the beginning when he was first coming onto the scene.
well, he went to New York FC, who are obviously owned by the Manchester City Group as well, the City Group, and was signed by Man City then, but then loaned back out to New York. Did very well over New York. Was in the team under when Frank Lampard was there. Was there when Pirlo was there. So we learned a bit from those people. He then goes to Middlesbrough on loan and just doesn't get a kick of a ball, doesn't work out, completely flops on his backside at Middlesbrough. And then he's gone back to Man City, and Leeds brought him in on a season-long loan. He played a couple of games off the bench, did pretty well, but was still young, pretty raw. Following season, Leeds got him on a second-year-long loan. Did very well in the second season for Leeds, helped Leeds get promoted. And then Leeds made the move permanent for 15 million, I think they paid for him. But up until that point, Jack Harrison didn't have clubs beating his door down. I think it felt a bit cold, the kind of goodbye he gave to the fans. He kind of said, I'll be keeping an eye on results, and the fans' reaction has been, we can keep an eye on them all you want, but you put us here and you're not going to help us get out of this problem. So you were part of the team that dragged us down. And Jack was very inconsistent last season. Everton fans will get an inconsistency from Jack Harrison. When he's good, he is very, very good. When he's not in the game, you'll get frustrated with him. But as I said, I don't know anybody in the Premier League who's got as good a first touch as Jack Harrison has. The ball just sticks to his foot when it comes out of the air. And given the way that Sean Dyche will play, and given the fact there'll be a lot of diagonal long field cross balls to him, probably fits the style perfectly from an Everton perspective. I think he'll do very well at Everton. I think Everton need far more than Jack Harrison. Just even looking at the weekend as well. But it's a start for them. It's a proper signing.
It is a start at this stage of the season. It's a start, which is worrying. I think Sean Dyche has a long road ahead of him. There's still talk about Onana potentially leaving and joining United to make up 2 Onanas. So I mean, Everton have got a lot to do. So I think they need to pull their finger out and get some bodies through the door pretty quickly.
Yeah, only the Ashley Young, Danjuma, and they did sign another striker. His name escapes me right now, but and then they've signed Jack Harrison. So they're starting to do some. They're all pretty attacking decisions. Well, outside of Ashley Young, the other one I want to talk to you about as well is we talked last week about Michael Olise. Looked like Manchester City were going to activate his £35 million release clause, and he was going to head off to City. Chelsea are now doing what they've been doing all summer. Just nicking everyone's lunch, or as you phrase it to me in a WhatsApp, nicking each other's girlfriends. And it looks like they're doing this again. And this is the bit that I don't get. Olise looks like Man City want him. It's 35 million release clause. And then out of nowhere, income Chelsea again. And they've also matched the release clause up for the player. So they've done it with Caicedo, done it with Lavia, and now they've done it with Olise. It kind of looks to me like they're stockpiling some English homegrown players a bit here as well. But do they need Michael Olise? Does he add anything to them? Or is it a case of taking him so nobody else gets him?
I think they're kind of future-proofing. There's value out there. Michael Olise at 35 million is a good value buy. I think Chelsea are basically it's like the early rounds of X Factor or something. I think it's just going to be throwing in bodies, trying different systems, seeing who stays fit, see who wants it. Is Mudryk going to work out? Maybe, maybe not. Is Sterling going to be able to continue his form, or is he just going to slowly decline further and further down the league into a series of other clubs and not be able to hack it at the top level? Nkunku is going to be injured and out until the end of the season. They've sold an absolute raft of players, and for 35 million, Olise does give them some flexibility. It does give them some options. They don't exactly need the bodies because they're playing on a lot of different fronts. They're not in Europe. They've basically just got domestic cup competitions as well as the league. Chelsea have priors for taking players just so others can't have them now, albeit that was under a different regime. It wasn't under Todd Boehly. But is that something they're going to continue? It looks like it. I mean, to get Caicedo and then Lavia as well it's a bit greedy, to be honest. But it is possibly just to chop the legs off Liverpool as well, and to not give them a player that I think it's quite obvious they needed. after that Liverpool Chelsea game. There was a great kind of bit of banter going online that they should have brought Caicedo out into the center circle before kickoff, and whoever wins gets to keep him. Yeah, exactly. Put him in a split kit and have a little bit of a tug of war. But despite the result, I think Chelsea did come out on top of that in terms of the performance. So yeah, I think it's a shrewd buy for 35 million to get Olise. So a little bit of both, probably a bit of a safe answer, but I think it's the correct one, to be honest.
No, I think you're banging the money with it. It's the Nkunku one as well at Chelsea, but we're on Chelsea. That has to hurt a lot, given how long it's taken to get him in the door, and then before he even kicks a ball in the league, he's out done for the season. And then assuming everything goes well with recovery, he gets back. Thoughts on that one?
Especially having gotten rid of Havertz, who was their only real kind of stand-in striker. Lukaku obviously isn't going to be anywhere near the club with, Juventus and Inter Milan and Chelsea, and there's all these negotiations going on. So Lukaku's not getting a look in. Havertz is gone. Nkunku is brought in. He gets injured. So they're kind of stuck at the moment, and I don't know how they're going to react. Maybe that's where Olise comes in. Maybe they try him up front and keep him there for a while. But I think they'll manage okay. I think they're going to be doing what Arsenal are doing, which is basically having a lot of very talented, creative players up front with no real target man, so to speak. Even when Jesus comes back and is fit, he's not exactly a target man. I thought Chelsea played quite well. I thought their patterns of play were very good. They run a lot. They've got a very young profile of a team now. So it's a big inconvenience. Clearly, they need Nkunku. It'd be nice to have a target man, but I think they're going to manage okay without him. They certainly looked fine against Liverpool. So, but we've got a couple of weeks left. So let's see who they get in the door.
And then the last piece of just kind of news is it looks finally like it's going to happen. Alexander Mitrovic is going to head to Al Hilal. He's going to leave Fulham. Looks like they've agreed a fee now. He didn't play some time at the weekend, so his quotes of never playing for the club again didn't hold water. At least he's doing it the professional way. Come back, play your games, let them agree to fee, and go. Don't force a move. Yeah, we won't talk about players forcing moves. It's too close to home for Leeds fans right now.
I mean, listen, they're going to miss him. They started with Raul Jimenez up front anyway, so I think they were fully prepared for this to happen. It'd be a nice little cash injection for them as well, and hopefully they can utilize it well. They got a great result against Everton, a pretty tidy 1-0 win. I thought Everton might put up more of a fight. It was a reasonably close-ish game, but Al Hilal snapping up more players. I mean, they're causing problems for United now as well, because Eric Bailly was looking like he was going to be out the door. United's outgoings have absolutely fallen apart, but Bailly was supposed to be going there, and Aymeric Laporte apparently is going to be leaving City and going to Al Hilal. Spanish international, 29 years of age, and going to Saudi and chasing the money. I'd have thought he at least had another 2, 3, 4 years at the top, but Mitrovic, Laporte, Al Hilal are hoovering up some pretty good names, and in the peak of their career as well. It's not going there for the retirement.
I wanted to ask you this as well. Actually, I forgot about it till you just mentioned the Saudi stuff there again. There's a story going around today. BBC published a small bit on it. It's not a huge amount. That the Saudi Pro League is looking for a guest spot in the UEFA Champions League. So what they want is a winner can enter the competition kind of, prize kind of thing of inviting one in. Like the Eurovision in Australia and the Eurovision. That kind of thing where everyone else in that country or that continent goes, this doesn't make any sense. But the one being dragged into it, like, yay, we're here. This is great. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? I have my thoughts on that. I mean, my friend Andrea Russo put a message out with the front of the Champions League trophy, which is basically translates to the European Conference of Football. It says it on the trophy, European. So, is this how the Saudis sell this league to younger players? Now, like, you still get a Champions League place if you win it. Are you in favor of them coming into the Champions League at all? What's your take on it?
Absolutely not. It's the only trump card they have left. When you see what the Saudis did with golf and how they managed to basically barge and elbow their way into a centuries-old institution that was very Western and just completely barge their way in. The only card that teams within UEFA and FIFA have over these teams is the fact that it's the only thing they have going for them to be able to stay in Europe and to make sure that they keep their players. I think if you do allow them to have one foot in that door, they're going to absolutely smash it open, and you're going to see more and more players going to Saudi Arabia. It will be a very foolish move, and I think it will be the collapse of a lot of European football as we know it. I'm incredibly worried about the Saudi influence on European football, and I hope they are not given that spot, because it's going to spell really, really bad news for FIFA, UEFA, clubs across Europe. I think it's going to be a disaster, so I hope they're kept well away from it. But money talks.
You know how this works, though, don't you? You know how this works. Yeah. As you said, it starts off with a rivalry, which is what they've done with the bidding for the Pro League. They've now matched the spending power of the Premier League and clubs in Europe. So that's similar to what Live Golf did, launch a competitor and then, or at least fund the competitor and then see where that goes. Get the talent, because the talent will drag fans. So do that.
Yeah.
And then you approach the PGA and you look for a merger, which you now look at this here in the Pro League are approaching UEFA, looking for a spot in the UEFA Champions League. And you're like,
that's
okay,
it.
You're doing exactly what you said.
I think it's an absolute disaster if they do it. But listen, I mean,
takes a spot away from a European club. Remember that it will take a spot away from a European club.
It will, and but it's not about taking a spot away from a European club. That is a small ripple in what will be a tsunami of issues for football, and it stinks. I think it will create a power vacuum. These guys have so much money in the trillions, and they know that oil is finite. It's not going to last forever. They got to use their wealth now while it's at its, at its most potent. And they're just trying to buy their way into the largest sporting institutions in the world to give relevance and a platform for their country, their culture, their regimes, whatever you want to call it. Football cannot succumb to this, but football is so dirty and is so corrupt at the very highest levels. And these guys have piles of money that people at the very top of the game will find it almost impossible to ignore. The fact that Qatar got the World Cup is a joke. And then they start kind of running around disrupting seasons, air-conditioned this, human rights abuses. We've seen that UEFA and FIFA will fold when they have money stuffed into their pockets. So will we see Saudi teams being put in? If not this year, it will be next year. Or the Super League will rear its head again, and it will be a global Super League, and you'll see teams not just from Saudi, but from other areas as well. I think it will be the death of football as we know it, and I hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, when you think about it from a Super League perspective, that was being driven by Juventus, Barcelona, mostly because declining revenues, both clubs in debt, they had a lot of money issues. They needed that European money. They needed bigger money than that. Yeah. Barcelona, as we talked before, an absolute mess when it comes to finances right now, up to their eyeballs in debt, and they've front loaded all their sponsorship deals. That's exactly, but they front loaded all their sponsorship deals, so there's nothing coming in a couple of years' time, and they're going to be, unless they're winning Champions League, they're going to be in trouble. This situation is going to worry those kind of powers more than that as well, because it knocks them further down the pecking order. These clubs have got massive amounts of spending power. The only thing I look at this and kind of see is there's a threshold in this, at least initially. There's only so many players the Pro League can buy right now. And maybe it's 1 year of just amassing huge amounts of players and to build your squads up. But then after that, it becomes 1 or 2 players a year, maybe from each club. It becomes a case of just buying the odd player, as opposed to Al Hilal buying 15, 16 players every season from Europe. It's going to be 1 or 2 next year. And at least that kind of regulates it a little bit and calms it down. But as you said, when you've got a big filthy pot of money, you can do an awful lot with that. You can influence an awful lot of people in decision-making areas. I think I would be disgusted to see them in the European League. I think all the pride stuff that the UEFA and FIFA have done over the years becomes a laughing stock if they do that as well, unless there's huge regime changes or progress made in Saudis, which isn't going to happen. But as we've seen before, and Infantino appears to be the same as every other FIFA president before him. It's like a big bag of cash in front of them, allegedly. I am corrupt. Yeah. I am money.
I am corrupt.
Money.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. But change happens. Things don't stay the same, and money is usually what dictates change, and these guys have an awful lot of it. And there's a lot of clubs that are on their knees. I would hate to see it, but time will tell. But I think relying on the power brokers of football to resist large sums of money to maintain the integrity of the game, I think is an absolute fantasy. I hope it's not, but I think they're going to find themselves in the Champions League in the next couple of years. I think that's pretty nailed on.
I think you might be right. Which is a sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
Right, Ron, let's get into the review for the games. We've done our news bit. Let's get into and also, it should be said, we did some predictions as well. So let's say our predictions got on against these as well. So let's get this on. Here we go. Let's start off with the first game of the week. It was Manchester City versus Burnley. Funnily enough, I think it's the only one we actually didn't put down a prediction for.
I'd have said 3-0, so I'd have got that right anyway.
You can't just say that. That's no.
I just did.
You can't just go.
No, you're right. That's absolute bunkum. Yeah, 3-0.
Dominant performance by Manchester City. Exactly what we expected.
Yeah, and to be honest, Burnley put up a good fight. They had some opportunities. Vincent Kompany did not turn up to take away a point. They actually played reasonably well, carved out some chances. Ederson was tested on a few occasions. Haaland did what Haaland does. The marking for his first goal was so poor. It was just 3 Burnley defenders just on the 6-yard line, just ball watching. They looked like meerkats. They were just following the ball, had no idea Haaland was just stood on the penalty spot, completely open, with 3 defenders dead in front of him, not even looking at him. It was so poor, but he slotted the ball away. His second goal, an absolute screamer, could be a shout for goal of the season. He just takes it on his toe, curls it in the top left-hand corner. It was a beautiful goal. And then defensive midfielder Rodri banging one in as well.
Yeah. And the other thing for me, this is where I think this might become more interesting in the next couple of weeks before the window closes. One change made by Guardiola. He brought on one of his subs, and that was Kovacic for De Bruyne, who looks like he's going to be out for a considerable amount of time with an injury now as well, which will be a huge dent to Manchester City's hopes of mounting a quad, or going for a quad this year, or at least defending a treble. Huge loss for them with De Bruyne going out.
We've seen De Bruyne out before for a number of months from City's team. And while he's a miss, it doesn't really change the result of most of their games. They just have too much firepower. They are a system of which De Bruyne is a very big part, but it's still a system. And it's a system that works even if De Bruyne is replaced. It's not a team that has 5 or 6 workhorses and then 2 or 3 magicians in there that just go in and work their magic, and that'll work 50-60% of the time, and you'll scrape enough points through just individual brilliance. There is a very definitive system. Jack Grealish was a superstar in Villa, comes into City's team, and he's just told, listen, love your work at Villa, but this is how we play. This is what you'll do. No more of that. No more of this. And I think they'll be able to just take De Bruyne out, put Foden in, or put someone else in, and they're going to be absolutely fine. It could be Paqueta from West Ham. There seems to be big noise going after him, 60-70 million quid. They want to go after him. I don't think he's worth that. He hasn't even justified the 50 million price tag that West Ham paid for him. But it looks like that's the player that he wants. So a big miss. I think the fans will be sorry not to see him play. Will it make much of a difference to their title charge? I don't know. Take Haaland out of that equation as well.
Yeah. And
now we're looking at something a little bit different. But I think they'll get on just fine without him. They've done it before and they'll do it again.
What's your thoughts on the bench, though? I mean, given the amount of talent he has on the bench in a game that was won reasonably early on, clearly we talked already last week about him not being happy at halftime and his, show ponying for the cameras a little bit. Unnecessary argument with Haaland. But fair enough, Kovacic comes from Chelsea. He's an experienced midfielder. He's won it all. He comes in, he comes on for De Bruyne, and he plays. But no one else on the rest of that bench even gets a minute of football from a game that they won pretty comfortably against a side that will probably be down in about the bottom 6 of the table at the end of the season. So if you're a substitute in that team, bearing in mind you've won everything last year, you've got your Champions League medal now, you've got that on your CV.
Yeah.
Do you sit there for the remainder of the transfer window and go, yeah, I'm happy to play 500 minutes a season? Maybe.
It's the defenders. If I was a defender, I'd be quite scared. When you're a 29-year-old Emerick Laporte, who's a starting centre-back with Ruben Diaz for Spain, and you're shipped out to Al Hilal at the age of 29, that's pretty scary. To know that they can just disregard a player of his caliber. I think City have developed themselves into such a name now where I think players are happy to go along for the ride. But again, that was before they won a treble and they've won everything. So it's like, okay, I've got those medals put away now. So this kind of stick with us. We're going to get that Champions League. That's done now. So they have all the medals. They have everything. So it's going to be harder to keep these players happy. But I don't know whether it's going to be a case of whether he wants to give any player that didn't play 90 minutes in the next game instead of giving someone 60 minutes. And then when you take them off, it's like, oh, I'm the first player that he takes off when he wants to make a sub. Instead, you just start the next game and maybe he brings in 4 or 5 new guys and just plays. Again, it's because he has a system. It's not like, oh, well, we have this player in, so we're going to have to rejig things. He buys players to fit a system. And when one player's gone, another one takes his place. And the system keeps working. They don't have to change formation. They don't have to do anything new. And I think he could change 4 or 5 players, give them 90 minutes and goes, look, listen, you're not going to play this game. But in 2 weeks' time, Ferguson was great with this with United. Someone might play them.
Because there are managers like Ferguson did, like Tuchel was doing at Chelsea to a degree as well last year. But there are managers who will rotate their talent squad around. Guardiola just doesn't rotate his team. Team players just, I mean, if Haaland is fit for the entire season, Haaland will play every game. If De Bruyne is fit for the entire season, he'll play most of the games. He might rest him towards the back end of the season when they start getting in the mix for trophies and managing his minutes. But he just doesn't rotate his side at all. Like, he tends to go, right, that's the team that's playing and that's my best 11.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. He has a few undroppables, but one of the like, I mean, you take fantasy football for instance. He's a fantasy football nightmare because you don't know what defense and what midfield he's going to play. You just don't. You bring in players. Oh, he's definitely going to be playing. No, dropped. Ruben Diaz and who else was it at the weekend? Ruben Diaz and John Stones, not even on the bench. Now, I know Diaz was rested because he got a concussion, so they got a bit worried about his concussion a few days before kickoff, so they had to give him a standard 7-day rest period. But John Stones, I don't know if he's on the treatment table, wasn't even on the bench.
Mainstay for him all last season as well.
Yeah, in defensive midfield. So I would disagree that he plays the same 11 all the time. He's actually quite famous for not doing that. He does have a few undroppables, but you wouldn't see Gundogan for a month, and then all of a sudden he plays 5 games in a row. Foden gets dropped, then he's in for 3 games in a row. Alvarez started, and there was a front 2 for City
in the 10.
This time. It wasn't a front 2 actually. He did play behind.
But then they were when they attacked, it became a 2, and then when they dropped off, it became a 1, and he dropped in behind them again.
Yeah,
but it's
precisely
a new, slightly different system from Pep. Which I think I said that a couple of weeks ago. Will Pep go with the same stuff, tried and trusted, or will he start playing around with some things this season because he's won it all, kind of thing? And it was interesting to see Alvarez start that game with Haaland, considering, as you've already pointed out, that kid's not going to sit on the bench because there's a talent there and he wants to play games.
First game of the season, you're up, kid. You're starting. Here we go. Especially with the departures they've had, so he's going to have a bit of a juggling act. But I think you're going to see a lot of those guys that don't get on the pitch. They'll get 90 minutes the next game. This idea of giving people kind of token 15, 20 minutes. So when everyone's getting full 90 minutes on rotation, you do feel like you're part of a squad and that you're just as important as everyone else, as opposed to being the guy that gets 10 minutes at the end of the game to run the clock down, to give the better guys a bit of a rest. If you're given 90 minutes, 15 times a season, you do feel a more valued part of the team when you're on the pitch at that first whistle. And I think that's what he's going to have to do. And I think it's what he is going to do. So it's a nice problem to have.
It is for him. Yeah. Just going to say it again before we move on to the next team. Premier League, update your badges, update the crests of the clubs. You're the Premier League website. You should know this. Newcastle 5, Aston Villa 1. We've already kind of briefly touched on it. An absolute pasting for Aston Villa, who will be shocked at that. I know I was shocked to see that result, bringing the players they brought in. 2 incredibly attacking teams in this game. Beautiful game of football to watch. One of the most exciting games I've watched in the Premier League in a very long time. Goals from Tonali, which is a great start for him. You've obviously also talked
Great
about
goal.
the goals. Just, yeah, it really was. He gets a great goal. Isak gets 2. A very unhappy Callum Wilson comes off the bench and scores.
Did you see his face?
Do you know what? I'm okay with that if the person that's playing ahead of you doesn't score. But when he's picked ahead of you and he bangs in 2 in the first day of the season, you can't really complain. Manager got the decision correct.
Yeah.
Wilson's gonna have to get used to this. He's gonna have to get used to it. He was the main man last season, but they are going for bigger things this year, and he will have to get used to being part of a squad. I thought Isak was excellent. I thought he was absolutely excellent.
He's potentially a world-class player. And I mean, genuinely a world-class player. 2 goals, looked very, very good. He's silky, great feet, great movement, good dribbling. He's got a killer shot on him, good vision. Such a shame he was injured for such a large part of last season. God knows what else he could have done. But to be fair, Wilson was banging in the goals. I don't think they were lacking firepower up front. But to dismantle Aston Villa 5-1, like the battle of the new boys, the rhetoric around Aston Villa being able to break into the top 4, and some to the detriment of Chelsea and Liverpool and far more established teams. I mean, a good 6 months in the league, and one swallow does not a summer make, and people were saying a lot of very, very kind of, I don't want to say infantile, but it was just overly excited that, oh, Villa are going to get top 4. It's like, they're still Villa. They've signed Moussa Diaby. They've got an informed Watkins and a few nice players knocking around. There's still 6 or 7 teams in this league that are more established and better and more proven than Aston Villa. And remember, Unai Emery had an Arsenal team, which man for man is probably better than this current Villa team, and didn't do the May West there. Now, that's not to take his managerial credentials for granted. He has proven he's a very, very top-class manager and can win trophies. But Villa are a long way off it. And it was suitably proven on the first day of the season. Newcastle dismantled them, scored for fun. New boy Moussa Diaby getting that goal was fantastic. Nice goal. That was a plus, but 5-1, very emphatic.
Yeah, Diaby cut out of a second as well. Some bad decision making might have changed the game slightly. If he got the second chance, he would have made them 2-1. I didn't expect a dismantling of Villa. I don't think Villa are a top 4 side, but I did think they would be top 6 or thereabouts in the top 6. I thought they bring enough. Nicolo Zaniolo looks like he's going to be done and dusted with them today as well. That is a talented attacking player coming in there as well, which will add some goals and some set piece wizardry, I would imagine, as well. Very good player, Zaniolo. And outside of having a few bad injuries a couple of years ago, he could have gone on to be a top player. Question mark over his attitude. Same agent, we talked about this. Same agent as Willy Gnonto, who's currently on strike at Leeds and training alone. Because he's been denied a move away from the club. And Zaniolo has done that in the past as well. So they may have an issue with an agent next year. But as for now, they'll have work to do defensively. Tyrone Mings looks like he's going to be out for a while. Bad leg injury. Yeah, not a huge amount into contact. It was a shoulder-to-shoulder tackle. There was nothing in it. Player went over his leg. That's all it is. But Pau Torres got an earlier debut than he was expecting, I think, and maybe found the pace of that game a little tricky to get to terms with. But work to do for Aston Villa next week, and a great start for Newcastle United heading into week 2. Moving on, we got some of the new boys. Sheffield United's first game, home game, Bramall Lane against Crystal Palace, and we see a win for Crystal Palace. Goal coming from Edouard, who you picked out a couple of weeks ago as a man who will score them goals this season. And day 1, week 1, bang. In he goes with a very much a poacher's goal, a fox in the box type goal in around 6-yard area, nice little tap in. But he gets the goal for Palace. It's not a spectacular start for Palace. They are missing, obviously, Wilfred Zaha. If they lose Michael Olise as well, that's a problem, I think, for Crystal Palace in terms of creativity. Obviously, Eze's a talented boy and will create an awful lot. But they're 2 potentially huge losses and not brought in massive replacements.
No, they haven't. But listen, it's 3 points on the board for Palace. Pretty standard. They may have been hoping to get a few more goals against a pretty average Sheffield United team. But listen, first day of the season, away from home. You've just sold your captain fantastic during the summer. Sold him. He left. They didn't sell him for anything. He left, end of his contract in Wilfred Zaha. But 3 points on the board. Olise is still there. Eze is still there. Edouard banging in goals. I think Palace are going to be absolutely fine. If Olise is going to be a big miss for them, but if they've got Edouard and Eze there, I think they're going to be all right. And listen, it was a pretty standard game. Wasn't too kind of all action barn burner kind of a game, but it was a very tidy 1-0 win for Palace. 3 points in the bag, and they can just roll into game week 2 with a little bit of confidence.
Yeah, they diced around with relegation briefly towards the back end of last season, but they can chalk 3 points off their 40-point total they need for this season to relax a little bit going into game week 2. So well done to them. Moving on to Everton and Fulham. Everton, as we mentioned already, bringing in Jack Harrison this week as well, but a home. They're possibly their final season at Goodison Park, but they might have part of next season at Goodison Park as well before they move into their new stadium. But a defeat to Fulham. Bobby Reid. Love Bobby Reid. I'm a fan of that man's work rate. I think he's a very good player. Came off the bench, scored a goal for them as well. They've got I like Bobby Reid. Doesn't score a huge amount of goals, doesn't do not a massive player, but I like him. I think he's a tidy workhorse and I like the player. So nice for him to get off the mark. Comes off the bench, scores for them. But nothing spectacular in this game. But a good win that might settle the nerves of some of the Fulham fans who will be looking at Mitrovic leaving and the Saudi interest in their manager as well floating around before the start of the season. So if you're a Fulham fan, you probably
syndrome avoided so far anyway.
Yeah, I'd say a big sigh of relief on Saturday evening for a lot of Fulham fans.
Yeah, I think they were going into this game with a little bit of trepidation. There's been a lot of kind of speculation surrounding that club between its between its two key members of staff, which is Mitrovic and Silva. Manager fantastic and striker fantastic, and to know that those two were potentially circling the drain all summer. To still have both of them on day one of the Premiership was a bit of a relief. It looks like Mitrovic is going to go, but listen, it's 3 points, job done. Silva's still there, so they can just roll on and hopefully continue that form again. I don't think they're going to be as potent and as high up the table as early as they were as last season, but I think if they establish themselves as a credible mid-table team in their second season back in the Premiership with the departure of a 16-goal striker in Mitrovic, and that's a 16-goal striker that missed the last 10 games of the season, 8 games of the season. If they can replace him, I think they'll be fine. But it's a 1-0 win without him really on the pitch. So I think Fulham can take a lot of confidence out of that game and move forward.
Clean sheet, especially if you're a team that may think you might be flirting around with a drop. Having a good defense is a massive point. So well done to them. Brighton, De Zerbi, second season syndrome not kicking in just yet. Excellent performance by Brighton. Some very fast-flowing football. Bags of goals in this one as well. Solly Marsh with a header early on. Lovely glancing header. We saw a penalty from Pedro. Soft enough penalty, Rowan? Did you think there was genuine contact with consequence in that?
Poor. When you compare that's a penalty, and we'll touch on Onana's antics later on. That was a really, really harsh penalty. I mean, when you're sliding in, unnatural movements and placements of the arm, but when you're sliding in, you naturally put your arm behind.
Oh no, that was That's the Luton penalty. The Brighton penalty.
That's the Luton penalty. Oh yeah. Sorry, is that what you're talking about?
And him just dropping, and you're like, the new rule this year was supposed to be you can make contact in the box, but there has to be genuine no attempt to win the ball. But when
I remember what you're talking about now. It was a little soft. He did go down
very easily.
He did go down kind of easily. It was two soft penalties really in that game. Sorry, I was thinking of the Luton penalty. That penalty, I know. I remember when you first saw it, you were like, come on. Really? You see them given, but Luton's penalty was outrageous. It was very poor. I'm sure they're delighted to just, get a Premier League goal under their belt, but it was a really, really weak penalty. Elbow out the back.
And I get the arms away from the body thing, but when your back is to the ball, you're sliding, and that's your arm on the ground to stop you from smashing yourself into the ground. Like, it's behind the player and low on the ground. Yeah, like, he's not done that to block the ball. It's motion.
Not at all. And it is in a natural position. I thought it was very, very harsh. I think if the arm is away from the body in any way, shape, or form, and the ball hits it. But to be honest, I just hate these hard and fast rules. A bit of subjectivity has to come into it. I mean, they try and make these hard and fast rules to alleviate any blame from the part of the referee. So they have these kind of black and white rules. If it does this, it's out of the ref's hands. He just has to enforce the laws that we've made. There needs to be an element of circumstance being brought in, and referees using their logic, their smarts, and their kind of powers of deduction to make a call and to own it. And I think all these ridiculous rules are there to kind of take that ownership away from refs and to absolve them of any sort of blame or ire from fans afterwards. I think it's kind of cowardly to have this. You need to have refs in there that just go, listen, that's nonsense. That's clearly not a penalty, even though his arm is out. But again, they're going to protect the refs as much as they can. And it ain't the first and it ain't going to be the last controversial decision, especially in the box that we see this season. But a pretty great night for Brighton. They didn't miss Moises Caicedo. Was it Mahoud Dahoud stepping in to play alongside? Is it Mahoud Dahoud?
Yeah.
Yeah, in beside Pascal Gross in that holding too, and Matoma, March, Evan Ferguson, new boy Yao Pedro getting on the score sheet as well. Could be a fantasy football kind of dark horse, pretty cheap, £5.5 million. But listen, they were very impressive. Matoma was incredible. They will do very well to keep a hold of that guy next season coming in from the left. I don't know who'll need him. Maybe Chelsea will go for him if Sterling gets a little bit too old and Mudryk isn't doing his thing, but he is a super player. Evan Ferguson, you were saying something about him already being linked away from the club.
Already, I'm starting to see news talk today, Off the Ball did a thing, and already the headline on it was, when is Evan Ferguson going to leave Brighton? Like, it's ridiculous, and it's Irish media that have started this. There is a
of course
cohort of Irish sporting journalists who want Evan Ferguson at Manchester United as soon as possible, and personally, it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake. I think he's super young, and he can go to Manchester United in 2 years' time. He can learn his craft, play lots of games, get lots of minutes. He won't get that at Manchester United straight away. He'll have to work his way in. I think it will slow his growth. Great. I would leave him exactly where he is for the length of his current contract. And then if he's 22, 23, made a name for himself in the Premier League, the bigger teams will be snapping his hands off, snapping at the bit to get him. I just think it's crazy to start linking him with big moves like that now.
Well, you've got new boy Yao Pedro in there who's still unproven. He did get a goal, but it was a penalty. And you've got an aging Danny Welbeck who's going to be in and out of the team for various reasons, wanting to rest him, keep protecting those knees of his. So he's at a club that plays very free-flowing attacking football that does have good rotation. The age profile of the people that he's competing with is really nice as well. He's a 19-year-old kid. He doesn't look 19. He's very filled out. He's not wiry. He's a big, strong guy. He's shown a lot of bravery in games last season. But if he goes to a big top club, he's just going to be sitting on the bench the whole time. Going to the likes of United is crazy, seeing as they've already got a 20-year-old kid coming in to lead the line and a lot of other youngsters around him. So I think United, while I'd love to see him play regularly for United, he won't. So I think he is at the perfect club. And I hope he stays at Brighton and keeps developing the way he has, because he's got a great manager and he's got great supply lines around him. There's few teams in the league that can boast the likes of Pascal Gross, Solly March, Matoma, and now a Yao Pedro that can supply quality balls all game. I think he's spoiled for choice where he is. I couldn't think of a better team for him to be in.
Yeah, should be pointed out as well. I thought the Luton Town goalkeeper, bar the third goal, I think, which was Adingra's goal. I thought he had an excellent game and kept the scoreline down. He was very busy goalkeeper. Got caught his near post for the third goal, which is disappointing for him. He'd be very disappointed getting beaten so close at his near post. But I thought he had an excellent game for Luton. They're gonna.
It could have been a cricket score.
Could have been.
It could have been a cricket score. Really, really could have. That's a very good point that you made. Despite it being 4-1, it was he did actually have a decent game.
Yeah, he made some really, really good saves. Of shots that I thought were goal bound. So that's a solid thing for Luton to at least have. They've got a good goalkeeper there. Moving on then, Bournemouth and West Ham 1-1. Not a huge amount. Jared Bowen giving them the lead, and then Dominic Solanke, again, another player you picked out a couple of weeks ago as being someone you thought would step up again this year on the back of a good season last year. He's done that. He's got a Premier League goal off the mark.
Didn't start the game, I believe.
No, but he needed a goal early in the season to prove he can do it in the Premier League on a consistent basis, and that he's a very talented young player. I remember him breaking into the Great Britain team for the Olympics as a kid, and he was, everyone talking about him, and it just didn't happen. You know, you're waiting on when's it going to click, and just last season specifically, I thought he had a very good season last year, and it looks
He
like
got
he
that
started
move to
this season.
Liverpool, and it just kind of fell apart for him really in Liverpool, and he just kind of stagnated there. But we've seen a lot of great strikers go to Liverpool and just fall by the wayside, like Robbie Keane, Danny Ings. They just, for whatever reason, it just doesn't click for them. Solanke's he's a good player, got off the mark and did it in the space of 20 minutes. I think he only came on and played 22, 23 minutes. And West Ham, great to see Jared Bowen getting back on the score sheet
right away
after having such a good season the season before last. He went off the boil a little bit, didn't score as many last year as he had the year before.
Big goals last year,
injuries.
He got some big ones last year, especially in Europe, but not the frequency as much as he had the year before.
Yeah, I mean, he was knocking on the door of the England team, and I hope Jared Bowen continues that form that we know he can have. Soucek got the assist. Soucek was the Jared Bowen before Jared Bowen turned up. He was scoring goals for fun the season before that again. So if Soucek and Bowen can step up to the plate, start connecting well with James Ward-Prowse, I think West Ham could do all right. I think they might be a little bit disappointed that they only got a 1-1 with the Bournemouth team. Bournemouth are still a minnow. They're a tiny little team. They're punching well above their weight and have done for a long time. They're a punchy little club, and I think everyone kind of really likes Bournemouth. They kind of always survive.
I would get used to liking, but I've spoken already about Areola. We talked about that last week. His first game in charge of Bournemouth against a West Ham side who are an established Premier League side who've just won a European trophy, Bournemouth had 65% of the possession in the game. And that is a trait you will see with Areola's teams. They will try and dominate possession. They will try and move the ball very quickly. It will be a very different looking Bournemouth side this year. But if you're a Bournemouth fan looking at that stat in your first game of the season back in the Premier League and you've dominated an established side possession-wise, now, possession with purpose is what you need more so than possession for possession's sake. But it's still a good building block to know that if you've got a lot of the ball, then they can't score a lot of goals because they haven't got the ball. So that's a positive for Bournemouth to take out that game.
For sure. And I think West Ham, they've got a busy couple of weeks ahead. The transfers are, looks like Harry Maguire isn't going to be going because he's still discussing his departure fee with United. The terms have been agreed between United and West Ham. The personal terms have been agreed between West Ham and Maguire. But I think Maguire is looking for a £15 million payout from United in order to leave.
Loyalty bonus.
As a United fan, that absolutely wrecks my head. I want shot at the guy. I never wanted him in the first place. I know it's easy to say that in hindsight. I never got the transfer before it happened. I thought it'd be a disaster when it happened. It's one of the darkest periods in our history having that man as our captain. But at the same time, I'm a working man, as are you. And I respect a working man wanting to get as much money as he can get from a club the likes of which he knows he will never be rejoining. He's on £250,000 a week. He has been treated badly by the fans. He has been stripped of the captaincy. He's now fifth choice centre half. He doesn't need to go anywhere. And he might do for his England chances, but England caps don't pay the bills. But a 15 million quid payoff or £1 million payoff, £1 million a month wages. All the power is with him, and it's made a big mess of United's transfer plan. So, listen, if West Ham bring him in, it's going to make them even better. He is a good player. He will do well for West Ham, given the type of ball they play. I think West Ham are going to be fine this season. I don't think David Moyes is going to be flirting with relegation at all. I think they could do quite well in the Europa League as well. So despite the 1-1 draw, I'm actually quite hopeful for West Ham and for David Moyes. I think he will still be there at the end of the season.
I think he needs a striker still. I still think they need a goal scorer. And I don't even Scamacca being there last year before he left this year. Scamacca didn't exactly set the Premier League on fire when he came into it. So I still think he needs to go and get a number 9. All right. Arsenal then 2-1 win over Nottingham Forest. Not the worst result in the world for Forest, considering. Arsenal fan Awayini finally scores against them. I think he scored against them last season actually as well for Forest. But Eddie Nketiah, who we talked about having to step up this year in the absence of Gabriel Jesus, scores in his first game. Bit of a deflection, but goes in anyway. And then Saka scores an absolute cracker, absolute banger of a goal. Beautiful finish. The talking point in this game is Timber is out for potentially the entire season in his first game after
I heard he
damaging
got
his
his mother.
ACL.
I heard he got his mother a box in the stadium for his debut
And he did his ACL
as well, and then he does his ACL. Absolutely heartbroken for the kid. I mean, United were linked to him, of course, all of last summer, and he didn't go on Van Gaal's advice. Thanks, Louis. Or he'd have been dropped for the Dutch national team. We got Martinez instead. That's obviously been a rip-roaring success. But Ten Hag really wanted Timber, and I think United fans wanted Timber. Arsenal really do have a player on their hands. I hope he comes back stronger than he did before. ACLs now are not the same as they were 10 or 20 years ago. Players are still able to come back and be just as good as they were, if not better. And I certainly hope that's the case with him. He is young. He should heal up quite well, but it's a big miss for Arsenal. He's a player with a lot of variety in terms of the positions that he can play. He's good on the ball, comes from that Ajax school. It's going to be a sore miss for them. And I feel really sorry for the kid. I really do.
Yeah, and then Arsenal have to go and replace him because they'll need him, and he's going to be up for probably the entire season. So he will come back and he will play games for Arsenal, but just not this year. And that is a problem as Arsenal try and close that gap on Man City.
I mean, they've still got Tierney on the books and a few others. But Anthony Elanga got his assist for his debut as well.
A great run. Fantastic run, a great ball.
Brilliant run. I never saw him do that for United.
I saw him doing preseason against Leeds. He has it in his locker.
Yeah.
So Chelsea and the ever-expanding midfield, they've got get a 1-1 draw against Liverpool. A disgruntled and unhappy Mo Salah coming off the pitch. And it's got to be said, Salah had a fantastic first half, but he had gone out of the game in the second half. And you can understand the manager trying to change things up a little bit, but makes a public showing of the substitution as well. Question marks of whether he'll stick it around at Liverpool now towards the end of the window, because there will be big Arab money thrown his direction as well. So
100%, yeah.
Yeah, he's a marquee signing for the Saudi Pro League, isn't he? Like, really is.
100%. It'd be a great signing for them.
In terms of a game, it was fine. It was fine. It was what I expected. The interesting thing is that these two are continuously trying to pinch each other's lunch right now, and they're competing with each other. Like, I think Chelsea are trying to close the gap on Liverpool. I think that's why when Liverpool are looking at a player, Chelsea are like, yeah, we'll have him, because if we have him, you don't get him, and that helps us close that gap on you a little bit. And I think there's a bit of that in that with what Chelsea are doing.
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way. And to be honest, I thought Liverpool would be the more dominant side in that game, and they just weren't. I thought Chelsea, not for the entire game, but I thought for kind of pockets of 15 minutes, they retained possession well. They didn't give Liverpool a lot. They didn't get a lot of chances on goal. You could see Pochettino's style starting to emerge from that team. A lot of energy, a lot of youth. They were all over the pitch. They didn't give Liverpool a minute to breathe. They were on top of everything. It was just classic Pochettino kind of stuff. And given the age profile of that Chelsea team, I think it's a marriage made in heaven. I think Pochettino is going to do really, really well with a crop of players that are young, that he can mold. He's kind of like a Van Gaal in that way. He likes young players that can do what they're told, which is why the PSG job was an absolute disaster. It's kind of the antithesis of the type of team that he would like to work with. But I thought Chelsea showed a lot in that game. I think they were better than I expected, and Liverpool were not as good as I expected. And despite the 1-1 draw, I think Chelsea do come out slightly on top in terms of the psychology of what that game meant. And it looks like they're going to get Lavia, and it looks like they're going to get Caicedo. So a very humbling week for Liverpool across the board.
Yeah, their transfers have not worked out for them just yet. Although, should be said, Diaz did score a goal for them, so that's great for him and kickstarting his season. But yeah, their transfers have just been prevented by other clubs getting involved in their business. So they need to get some business done between now and the end of the window. They were linked with Tyler Adams from Leeds after his move to Chelsea fell apart last week. But as of news today, Tyler Adams and Luis Sinistera's exit clauses from Leeds have expired as of today. So there'll be no guaranteed exit clause. So if Liverpool do want to go on Adams, they might have to pay for him slightly more than they would have had to without that. But a tricky one. I did think it would take Liverpool's team a couple of weeks to click, probably a bit longer than that. If they still need to bring in players, it's going to take some more time as well. So then moving on, Brentford and Spurs. Ange Postecoglou's first game in the Premier League. He gets a point and gets off the mark in a very entertaining game as well. That was very much tit for tat. It was up and down, and it was I go, you go, I go, you go in terms of goals. But goals from Romeo and Emerson from Spurs, which no recognised goal scorer, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, considering Richarlison
Mhm.
was starting up front. So you're not getting goals there anyway. And then again,
Yeah.
another player you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that would need to step up. And then Buemo for Brentford gets a goal as well as we say. Your fantasy league team this week must be rocking, by the way, because if you haven't picked the players that I've mentioned today, you've made a massive mistake. These are all hit home runs.
I know I went for the typical big boys in that I kind of had last year, but I do like these players like Solanke and Mbuemo and these guys. So I do like them. I think they're going to step up. They're going to get a few goals. They're not going to be getting as many goals as the players in my team, but I knew they step up. They have undoubted quality, and that's exactly what they've done. Spurs' new boy James Maddison getting 2 assists as well.
Yeah.
The second of which wasn't really an assist. He kind of fell over onto his arse, and then it kind of ricocheted off his foot into the D of the box. So 1.5 assists we'll give him, but I mean, it's chalked down as 2. Good points for Maddison. First game, 2 assists. Thanks very much. Job done. If he keeps doing that, he'll be a Spurs legend. And Spurs they looked fine. They played reasonable football. They had plenty of opportunities. So did Brentford. It was actually, like you said, it was a very entertaining game. And I think Ange Postecoglou will do okay. He's got a lot of money to spend. Who he spends it on, I don't think. I mean, coming from the Scottish Premier League to have that kind of money burning a hole in your pocket with a few weeks left to go in the transfer window, I can't wait to see what he does with it and who he buys. He's certainly going to have to buy somebody. Can't be relying on Richarlison.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing as well is there have been managers over the years who are very good at coaching teams to be better than they are. Historically, there's some standout managers. I always look at Ferguson's last year at Manchester United, when that Manchester United side shouldn't have been winning anything and he managed to win a title with them. There are managers who are good at doing that. There are managers who are very good at spending money and bringing in players. They can do that. We're going to find out which one Ange is, because he's going to have money now to spend. And bearing in mind how badly Spurs spent the Gareth Bale money, they will have to spend this better. Now, with inflation and everything else, the money they've got for Harry Kane won't go as far as that money did from Gareth Bale. However, they need to bring in 2 really, really top tier players. And again, we've said this before, they're looking for a striker at a time when everybody else is looking for a 20 goal a season striker.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the type of player, I mean, that I could see Spurs maybe taking a punt on. I don't think it'll happen. And like I said, Ferguson's at the he's at the right club in Brighton. But I mean, if Spurs really did want to take a punt and put 40, 50 million into a young player in the same way United have done with Højlund, Spurs could do worse than putting some money on Ferguson and bringing him in, and to have James Maddison, Heung-min Son, and Kulusevski playing behind Ferguson, it would be just as potent as the 3 players that he would have behind him at Brighton. I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean, if I had 50 million quid and I'm looking for a good number 9 that's going to stay at the club for the next few years and is not going to break the bank, I think Spurs could do a lot worse than taking a punt on that kid. And I'd love to see him in a Spurs shirt and take over that front line. Might be a little bit too young for Spurs' ambitions at the moment, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. So let's see what they do with that money and who they bring in. There could be some unknowns on the continent. They might bring in the likes of Taremi from Porto, who has a very established scoring record. But we'll see what they do. But they're definitely going to have to bring in someone. They can't rest their hat on Richarlison, that's for sure.
No. But at least they're scoring goals. They'll be happy with that. 2 goals away from home against a decent Brentford side, a very, very well managed side by Thomas Frank as well. So good result for them.
2 goals as well, yeah, without Tony. So it's good to see them get 2 goals without their great striker up front. And looking good for them as well. I hope they do well.
Yeah. Okay, and then we'll get on to the train robbery of the week. Manchester United versus Wolverhampton Wanderers. This should have been on paper an absolute cakewalk for Manchester United, a Wolves team that are in huge turmoil. Manager walking out on them, players being sold, nobody coming in of any real quality. Returning Matt Doherty and Nathan Collins coming in, 2 Irish lads coming into the club, 1 coming back and 1 coming in new. But nothing really else in terms of additions. They have Matthias Cunha from last year, who actually managed to get a start up front, but isn't massively clinical in the Premier League just yet anyway. And Manchester United score, take a lead. Wolves denied a penalty late on in the game, which appears to be the main. Before we get into the actual game itself, Rowan, The incident itself, when I saw it first, I thought, pen, nailed on. 100% penalty. No contact with the ball. Takes the player out. 100%. You're waiting on VAR to get involved. They don't. So it's just left as referee's decision, no goal, no penalty, play on. Right? PGMOL come out last night and apologized to Wolverhampton Wanderers.
John Moss, wasn't it?
Yeah, should have been a penalty. The entire referee pool that was brought in for that game, the assistant referee on the VAR, the referee on VAR, the match officials have been stood down from Premier League action this week as a punishment. So they'll end up in the championship. So we'll probably get them next week at Leeds. Great stuff for that. Thank you very much. But again, we talked about this, and I'm not saying that this is a reality, but I'm saying it feeds it. The top six bias of VAR, where you've got a situation where Wolves fans talked extensively last season about VAR going against them continuously when there were options, whether it was for or against them, it went against them. And then the first game of the season, they see the situation that probably would have given them a 1-1 draw taken away from them. What are your thoughts on that situation and then the game?
Firstly, yes, it was a penalty. When it first happened, I just went, oh, Christ. This is what Onana does. 1-0, we're hanging on, we've robbed them. And then he comes out and absolutely smashes a guy and misses the ball. I mean, it was like the most aggressive hug you've ever seen. I mean, he just runs out 2 arms and just barrels his chest into this guy. I mean, misses the ball when he's got the advantage of being able to use his hands. And the ball goes over him and the Wolves player and is headed by another Wolves player. That's the only thing that I can think gave Onana a reprieve, was the fact that the ball was never actually going to end up on the person's head whom he fouled. But at the end of the day, he went to go play a ball. He missed. He clattered into a fella, and it's a foul. It was a bad decision. I had some of the lads on my United WhatsApp group going, "Oh, it's never a penalty." I was like, "Bro,
100% penalty.
Come on, it was a penalty." Wolves got absolutely robbed. Cunha, you mentioned about the beginning, played very, very well. Yeah. Wolves played exceptionally well. They were as good as United were bad. Gary Neville had said in his post-match analysis that he'd never seen any Premier League Wolves team play as well as that team did that day. Now, maybe saying that just to protect United a little bit from their performance, but Wolves were exceptionally good. What were your thoughts on how they played? Did you see any of the highlights? Did you just the incident?
I was surprised, but my initial thoughts were how much space Manchester United allowed them to have to play and to let them into the game. Now, some of it could be a case of, well, Wolves just didn't give Manchester United an option. It was a case of they just played that way and United deal with it. Maybe they weren't expecting it. I keep going back to a lot of teams this year. The off season was shorter because the Premier League finished later last year because of the World Cup. So, you're still kind of in pre-season mode for probably a couple of games with them as well. Yeah. But I expected Manchester United to walk all over Wolverhampton Wanderers and just stonewall them. They didn't. I was very surprised. The Gary O'Neill effect again, like he did it last year at Bournemouth. He took a team that were expected to get relegated pretty comfortably. The manager previous to him was sacked for saying this team would go down without more players. And here comes Gary O'Neill into another team full of adversity and manages to get a performance in them. I'd be shocked if he's not telling them in the dressing room before the game. Everyone out there expects you to get rolled over, and everyone's expecting this team to get relegated. It's up to you to go improve your quality and whether you should be in the Premier League or not. He got a reaction out of his team, and he's going to need to do that for a lot more games because it doesn't look like they're going to bring in many players before the window closes, and they do need them. This season will catch up on a small squad pretty quickly, so they need to do that. In terms of Manchester United, they've got time. It's a 3 points. That's all it needed to be in the opening day of the season. They didn't need to set the world on fire. They've got some time to bet in, get new players in as well, get Højlund into that team as well and see how he does with them as well. So they have some time. Wolves, I still worry about Wolves. As good as they were, I still think it might catch up on them as the season goes on.
Possibly. I mean, the thing about United is, there's the old phrase, winning ugly. They didn't even win ugly. They won lucky, and I think there's a lot to be worried about for United. Now, the way Gary O'Neill played, it was very clever what he did. Now, United pushed up a little bit too far, so Casemiro ended up being isolated. Now, he looked bad anyway. His legs were very heavy, but it was basically United's 4.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
Casemiro.
It wasn't his legs that were heavy. His head is heavy and it's pushing his whole body down.
It might be that his fat head is pushing all the weight onto those legs. He was very isolated. Mount and Fernandes were playing very advanced, and they isolated Casemiro, who basically had 5 players around him. So he was not able to connect the defense and attack. Mount was very busy running up and down, trying to cover a lot of space. But we saw the statistics that came out from Mount, and it was zeros across the board. Tackles 1, aerial duels 1, through balls, goals, assists, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 across the board. Now, those statistics can be quite cruel. That doesn't necessarily mean the player did nothing or they weren't making an impact in other elements of the pitch or in other elements of the game. But what Palace actually did was they were actually the word I'm looking for is a vertical line going through the middle of the pitch. They were actually moving their players up and down like a graphic equalizer in a way, basically forcing United into playing the ball to Wan-Bissaka. Probably the poorest ball-playing player that we have outfield is Wan-Bissaka. He's a defensive player. So what they did was they overloaded every part of the pitch to force Onana to play the ball into Wan-Bissaka. And then Wan-Bissaka's options were basically hoof it over to Anthony, who then would have to hug the byline. He doesn't like hugging the byline. He wants to cut in. But when he cuts in, all his options have been cut off. So they basically just choked United's supply lines into playing it to Wan-Bissaka, playing it to Anthony into a position where Anthony can't do what he does, which is to cut in. And if that's all teams have to do to stop Ten Hag's United having their ball playing goalkeeper and playing through lines and all this kind of stuff, United are in big, big trouble. But it was a tactically very astute game. And it wasn't just a defensive masterclass from Wolves. They put United on the back foot for nearly the whole game, and United could have been 2 or 3-0 down before they scored that goal. Couple of good saves from Onana, one off the outside of the post. Garnacho probably had his worst game in a United shirt that I've ever seen. He got his start in the strongest 11. Ten Hag gave him the nod over Sancho. It was a huge moment in that kid's career, and he failed the audition. And Sancho came on with Eriksen to replace Garnacho and Mount, and sure enough, Sancho and Eriksen completely turned the game. They changed the pace of it. We opened up a lot more opportunities. And then it took Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Rafael Varane, probably, at least by the bookies' form, the 2 least likely players to score for United, possibly even on the pitch, combine to rescue 3 points. So a very, very lucky performance from United, and a lot of things that I think Ten Hag will have to work on. And I think Gary O'Neill and his players can be very, very proud of how they played, despite not coming away with any points.
Yeah, no, I agree. Right, that's the review for the first week set of games done and dusted. This will get shorter and tighter as we get on with this. We'll start doing the previews and reviews together. So we'll once the window's shut and all that kind of stuff is done and dusted, we'll get that out of the way and we'll just focus on the games then. And we will probably try and do something before the weekend's game as well. So keep an eye on the channel if you want to see that as well. And if you do like the channel, if you try, like we're trying to do here, we're new, we're trying to grow. If you do like the channel, please subscribe, like the video, share around if you want to. And we will hopefully keep making content and keep making videos people will like. So the objective view of the Premier League, if we can. Rowan, thanks very much as always for joining me. Really appreciate it, mate.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much.
And we will see you on the next one. Have a great day. Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye. All right. Good man.